Thank you for joining us on In Tune to Nature. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you in August of 2024 from Atlanta and the Muskogee Creek Territory in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountain Range. Today, we're going to be talking about water. Like air, it's one of life's most essential elements for all of us animals. Yet, our freshwater and river and wetland ecosystems are being polluted by animal agribusiness factory farms. There are things we can do about it, though, and to tell us about that is our guest, Larry Baldwin. He's with the nonprofit group Waterkeeper Alliance and serves as their campaign coordinator for the Pure Farms, Pure Waters program in North Carolina. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Waterkeeper Alliance is a global movement of community-based advocates united for clean, healthy, and abundant water for all people in the planet. They preserve and protect water by connecting over 300 local waterkeeper groups worldwide across 47 countries, covering almost 6 million miles of waterways. Their website is waterkeeper.org. Our guest, Larry Baldwin, serves as Waterkeeper Alliance's Pure Farms, Pure Waters coordinator in North Carolina. He works with the 15 licensed Waterkeeper Alliance groups in North Carolina in their efforts to reform the current polluting practices of the industrial meat producing facilities known as concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs for short. Previously, Larry worked as a river keeper in North Carolina, and he helped to start the Coastal Carolina River Watch organization, where he served as both executive director and Crystal Coast Waterkeeper. Before joining the Waterkeeper movement, Larry spent 22 years in manufacturing and warehousing management, while he also worked as a volunteer for environmental organizations in and around Maryland. Larry now lives in the city of New Bern in coastal North Carolina and enjoys spending time with his wife and 3 grandsons. Welcome, Larry.
Hey, Carrie, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on the show. And before we get into the water pollution issues, Larry, for listeners who don't know much about how animal farming has changed over the decades or who haven't seen a CAFO, a confined animal feeding operation, can you describe these factory farms for us, like from your own experience, so we get a sense of what they look, sound, and smell like?
Sure, and it's probably a good point to note that the term CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation, um, refers to poultry, chickens and turkeys, to swine, hogs, dairy, and also some cattle issues. But the CAFO, like it sounds, it's a concentrated animal feeding operation. So instead of the old days that most of us may remember of the what we call the family farm, I refer to the movie Charlotte's Web, where you had cows and horses and all that. Those days are kind of gone for the most part. We have moved now into what we refer at as an industrial factory setting, where thousands, in some cases tens of thousands of animals, again, poultry, swine, or cattle, are crammed into small buildings. They never get out of that building. They're living basically on concrete floors with some bedding in some cases. Um, they don't get to do what animals do.
Yeah.
Um, and then because of them being that concentrated, there's just a huge amount of waste that's generated. And so then you have to figure out what to do with that. So on the from the standpoint of the hogs, there's just what is referred to as a liquid waste. So it's collected in a large, they call it a lagoon, I call it a cesspool,
Yeah.
um, area about the size of a football field or more. And then periodically, when that lagoon cesspool level fills up, it gets sprayed out onto the ground. So what happens with that is that now you've exposed it to the environment, to the air, to the water, to the groundwater, and even more than that, you've exposed it to the communities.
Yeah.
So this industrial corporate method of raising animals, it's archaic and it does not work to the level that they're trying to make it work, particularly in North Carolina, as I know it.
Right, because it's out that concentrated ammonia and feces. It's just a disgusting smell. I've I've never smelled it up close because I've never gained entrance into any of these so-called farms, but like sometimes I'll be driving in North Georgia or parts of North Carolina, enjoying myself, radio on, windows down. you know, and then suddenly the stench just hits me and I have to roll up the windows. It's so gross. And I feel bad for the animals and anyone who lives in the area.
Well, and uh, I would love for you to come visit me in North Carolina, and I'll
Yeah.
show you it. The odor, and it's
Yeah.
different from swine than it is to poultry.
Right.
It will literally gag you. And
Yeah. Like
we
it's
have community
disgusting.
members. Yeah, we have community members living within a mile of five of these CAFOs.
Yeah.
So
Ugh.
the quality of life is it's horrendous.
Yeah.
And there's been some effort to tie in health issues with that, whether they're respiratory or we have many of our rural residents who've had to convert to buying their water in
Oh,
jugs because their well water is contaminated. We're starting to see the impacts from different diseases
yeah.
that are a result of this the way we're raising our meat. And as you said, the only one benefiting from it is what we call the integrator. That's the people at the top. The growers themselves, they're barely keeping themselves alive.
And by
The
growers,
whole
you're thinking of what people might call the farmer, like the person who's at
ex,
the facility is technically kind of working for Tyson or Purdue or one of these big companies. And so those executives are benefiting, but the farmers or the growers are actually struggling. And it doesn't seem like a pleasant way for them and the farm workers to make a living.
it's really not, Carrie. It's but they've been a lot of these growers that were previously tobacco farmers.
Oh,
So the tobacco industry went belly up, basically, not completely. So they had to find something else to do. Well, this looked like a very appealing thing. I can raise hogs. I'm a farmer. But they become more of a grower because they're not farming as we kind of have a tendency to want to think about it. And in that process, because they sign a contract, again, whether it's swine or whether it's poultry, they become basically what I would refer to as indentured servants.
mm.
Most of them, and there are some who will talk to us, say they're so far in debt they couldn't get out if they wanted to.
In
The whole
debt.
in
They're in debt
debt.
to these
They're in well,
corporations.
they're in debt to the banks because
Oh,
of the requirements of these corporations or integrators, as we call them, to force them to either upgrade their equipment or something that's going to cost them more money.
yeah.
And one grower that I don't want to mention his name specifically, but he's $250,000 in debt,
Whoa.
and he's not making any gains on that.
Oh
And
man.
we're
Yeah.
finding that whether it's swine or poultry, whichever, these growers they can't make a buck, but they can't get out
Oh,
because
yeah.
if you saw these facilities either from the air or just in videos, you know, so you've been spreading this waste all over this grower's property. What's that property good for now? If he decides, well, I'm going to get out and turn it into a development, that ain't going to happen. Nobody's going to want to live on that
Included.
property, and
Yeah.
just the cost of decommissioning that property would
Mm.
be astronomical. So they really are, and I have empathy for the growers.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a
the
lose-lose,
uh,
for almost everyone
it
involved.
is, it
Now,
is.
was it Cory Booker that put forward the some kind of law about creating a moratorium of sorts on new factory farms so that other people don't get stuck in this loop?
Well, there is currently a ban in North Carolina that
Oh,
you cannot build any new hog facilities. That's
okay.
just specifically to hogs.
Just for hogs, but now there's all these chicken facilities that are opening up.
Well, and and we definitely need to talk about that because
Yeah.
the issue there is transparency. But we can come back to that if you like.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
basically, what the ban does is say you cannot build any new lagoons or new facilities.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least there's that.
And well,
There's
and so there are some, if you decide or it's determined that your current cesspool is in danger of imminent failure, you may be able to get an exemption to construct another one.
yeah.
But they're also finding ways around that. We've got a big issue in North Carolina with the capture of methane, biogas. And that's another long story. But basically, what it does, it's kind of a loophole that allows these growers to construct another cesspool to support the operation of collecting methane. So they're just always trying to find ways that they can keep doing things the way they are, because that's how they make the money.
Right.
Okay. Particularly the integrators, like we said, they're not responsible for the waste. They own the animals, they own the feed. So now it's up to the grower to figure out what to do with everything else, which is really the biggest problem.
Yeah, so they all of this agribusiness system kind of pushes all the it externalizes all the cost and health and pollution and everything onto the growers and onto the community and the government and everything. So,
Well, you couldn't have put it any better. Externalizing it, there are things that we can talk about as far as some solutions go, but it's really the what I can consider or categorize as kind of a stranglehold that
yeah.
these integrators have on the growers, and as you mentioned, on the communities and on the environment.
Yeah.
And
Let's talk about the environmental part. Like
sure,
at the Waterkeeper Alliance, what have you and Riverkeepers found are some of the water pollution issues caused by having these industrial confined animal feeding operations in North Carolina?
probably one of the most obvious is just water pollution as a whole.
Okay.
Um, these facilities, as we refer to them, they're considered to be non-discharge, and because of that, they don't have to get a specific what they call a National Pollution Elimination Discharge System permit (NPDES) that would control what they're discharging into the environment. They're also deemed to be non-discharging off of their own property, but they're
Mm.
spraying this stuff on the ground, and whether through direct runoff or through precipitation, um, it is getting into our waters. And river keepers across the state have, for in some cases decades, been doing sampling. Now we don't trespass, so we do not go onto the facility itself. We are very careful about that.
Yeah.
But we've been able to take samples in creeks and streams and rivers adjacent to these facilities. And we can talk about bacteria specifically. The bacteria counts in many cases have been off the charts.
Ew.
But the problem with that is that in most cases the state doesn't have to recognize our information.
Mm.
Um, and they claim they don't have the resources to do a lot of this monitoring themselves, because if they did, I think things would probably look a little differently. At the same time, I don't think the industry really wants them to do that as the
Of
state
course
goes.
not. Yeah. So
So
basically,
from a
you're the ones seeing that there's all this sewage being put in the creeks and
right,
rivers.
right,
Eh,
and that comes from several different methods, Carrie. Whether it's hogs or poultry, they
yeah.
live in these huge confined buildings. With poultry, you can have 23,000 birds
Ugh.
in one barn. With the hogs, you can have 1,000, 1,500 in one barn. On the end of each one of these barns is what I mean. It looks like almost like a jet engine
Like
exhaust,
a big fan or
a
something.
big fan. And the reason for that is to get rid of the gases that are inside the barn, as they call it,
Yeah.
because otherwise the animals would die in their own gases
Mhm.
that they generate.
Yeah.
So now you have these big fans at the end of now you're blowing this stuff into the air,
Yeah.
and it can travel a lot of distance into communities, into neighborhoods. And then
Yeah.
the same thing with if you're still talking about poultry, the disposal of the waste. Poultry waste is, they call it a dry waste. It's more like kind of like a wet cake. You can kind of make a ball out of it, but it's not sprayed out as a liquid. It's actually transported as a solid in the back of trucks, tractor trailers, and because of that, it can be transported many, many miles away from where it's produced. And
Mm.
we don't have access to where that's going
Yeah.
or how much of it is going. So your impact to the environment and to the communities because of that is huge.
And
So
there's
you've
also
got
the slaughterhouses too, right?
oh
There's the farms that you mentioned, but then when they kill all the animals, all that's just disgusting, bloody. body
Well,
parts and
well,
everything.
bless you for bringing that up. Yes, Waterkeeper Alliance and river or Waterkeepers, actually across the country, are working on some issues that have to do with the slaughterhouses.
Yeah,
So they're, you're talking. Well, let's take the Smithfield Foods, which is hogs. They have the largest slaughterhouse in the world, I believe, at least not that in the country,
yeah.
that can kill thousands of hogs a day.
Mm.
And so they're not really monitored in a way that lets us know what exactly is coming out of them. So Smithfield Food Slaughterhouse in Tar Heel, North Carolina. We've got one of our North Carolina keepers who's doing some monitoring from that particular operation. We have another Waterkeeper who's looking at it's called Mount Air. It's a poultry facility to further illustrate the fact that these slaughterhouses,
Mm.
they're a huge impact environmentally. They don't have quite um, the physical appearance to be doing those kind of things, but they certainly are. You end up with algal blooms in the waters. This Smithfield slaughterhouse is on the Cape Fear River watershed, and the Cape Fear River has just continual issues with
Does it
algal
kill the
blooms.
fish? I know the algae blooms, and then when they
Oh
happen
my
in
God!
Florida, the same thing.
Well,
Oh, the
you have
fish die.
yeah, you have definitely done your homework because fish kills are a huge impact, not just from the slaughterhouses, but the Neuse River, which is actually the river that I started off on as a river keeper, has been incredibly impacted by CAFOs. And it's not just something that we suspect. Uh, Dr. Joanne Burkholder with NC State University has done a lot of study on the Neuse River. And unfortunately, the Neuse River has the unwanted distinction of having the largest fish kill ever recorded in the country at over 1 billion fish. And it
Oh.
happens annually, not to that degree, but usually, in the hundreds of thousands. And the Neuse River is not the only one. We have a lot of rivers where, periodically you're going to have these fish kills.
And think of all the
And
other animals in the food web affected by those fish kills too. That just the ripple effect of that on the ecosystem.
well, and I think you bring up a very good point there too. It's not just a matter of the location right where these facilities are. It's that it's spreading downstream as
Yeah.
water has a tendency to do. We have an organization, you mentioned it earlier, Coastal Carolina River Watch, who have been doing a study that involves the commercial fishermen, and the commercial fishermen recognize the impact that they believe that these CAFOs are having upstream on their own ability to catch clean, healthy fish. We talk a lot at times about the impact to the fisheries, recreational fishermen. In rural North Carolina, sad to say, there are quite a few families who are what we consider subsistence fishermen. That if they didn't catch something out of their local stream or creek or river, you know, they'd be going hungry. So what are we subjecting them to? The entire process that we're talking about here, and again, to go back to what you had said earlier, there's not a benefit to anybody except these larger corporations. Now, the only benefit there is the price of the meat at the market. And we're not going to get into the
Yeah,
quality
it's
of the meat, all that other stuff.
subsidized to be really low
Exactly.
cost. Yeah.
But you know, so the whole system is I'll use the term rigged, and
Right.
it's rigged for one purpose for these corporations to make just huge amounts of money on the backs of the environment and on the backs of the community members. And if you were to come to visit us, I can take you to talk with somebody. I don't have to be there. I can have you talk to people who they can tell you horror stories,
Oh,
Carrie, about what they have had to deal with.
it's
So
gross.
it
Yeah.
it it really gross is a good word for it. I'll agree with you there. Um, and again, it's primarily the communities that we refer to as the environmental justice communities,
Right.
primarily Black, Hispanic, Native American, low income, who are dealing with the brunt of this. And when these facilities first started showing up, particularly hogs, they were located in primarily in areas that formerly had been slave locations.
Mm.
And there's a lot of speculation as to, was that done on purpose? If you took two maps and put them on top of you would see. But
Yeah.
there's some correlation here. But it's also a matter of your rural communities, primarily those of color. They don't have the political clout and they don't have the monetary clout to fight back against these. And now you're also dealing with neighbor against neighbor.
Mm.
So you have a hog facility that comes in. Well, he may be dealing with the local hardware store to get what he needs on his facility, or he may hire somebody local to drive a truck for him. So now you've got families that are dealing with a split concern about what these facilities are doing. So
And
I'm
I
sorry,
know
go ahead.
we don't have more time to talk about that, but I know that Larry, you and I were mentioning that people can find out more about that through different films. One's called Eating Animals, and another one that we've talked about on the In Tune to Nature show is called The Smell of Money, which is
Right.
about a majority Black North Carolina neighborhood fighting back against hog farming waste that's making them sick. And it turns out, Larry, that you're in that. I didn't realize that. We
Yes.
recently realized that, and The Smell of Money is now on YouTube and some other
Right.
streaming sites.
And
Um,
so is eating animals as well
Eating
too.
animals. Yeah.
So
So to
yeah.
find out more about these environmental injustice issues. And if you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature. I'm host Carrie Freeman talking about the meat industry's confined animal feeding operations called CAFOs or factory animal farms and the water pollution and health problems they cause. And we're going to get into the solutions with the few minutes we have left. Our guest is Larry Baldwin, the Pure Farms, Pure Waters campaign coordinator for the Waterkeeper Alliance. Their website is waterkeeper.org. Larry, in terms of solutions, what types of actions has the Waterkeeper Alliance taken, or maybe what government agencies or lawmakers, what are they doing or should be doing to help protect ecosystems and rivers from factory farm pollution?
Well, let's start with some of the local or state politicians. Not much.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest concerns we have in North Carolina, is that the industry, as we refer to it at times, has a real heavy-handed influence on our political process, whether it's through campaign donations or just their ability to lobby. Um, so our state agencies, which which falls under a lot of these, or fall these um, regulations fall under these state agencies, state government. They just don't have the willpower to
Mm.
stand up. The federal government, we are working. We have folks at our Waterkeeper Alliance headquarters who are working on things such as transparency, holding these integrators, so these larger companies, accountable for what's happening on the ground as they're producing their own animals. So there is a lot of legislative work trying to be pushed through. Cory Booker recently introduced oh shoot, I'm forgetting the
The
name of it.
industry, I wrote it down, Industrial Animal
Thank
Accountability
you. Yes,
Act.
thank you for pulling me out of the fire there.
Yeah.
But again, even from a federal standpoint, the government does not want to stand up to this. So that's where it really comes down to,
Right. If
you
we
know,
don't all then like give our politicians the permission, or the cover they need to do something about this obvious problem that's
right,
affecting human health and wildlife and farmed animals.
right. And even in North Carolina, we have several politicians on our General Assembly who are either own a facility themselves or are part of a facility. So where's their focus going to be? Um,
That's
so
like a
we
vested interest or a
right.
conflict of interest, really.
So it comes down to looking to just end the industrial method of raising meat in North Carolina. Okay,
Yeah.
it's not the way it should be done. We're looking very hard into um, helping to convert to um, what we would call regenerative farming, which is a little different than sustainable farming. But regenerative would be taking the process back to the way I remember when I was growing up, grandpa's farm. And it's possible to do it. if nothing else, require that these CAFOs install some form of waste management themselves. We have wastewater treatment plants for the human waste. We can do the same. The technology is out there. The unfortunate part is the industry, again, does not want to be part of that being part of their cost. And it's also kind of, well, we don't want anybody to know we've been doing this wrong the whole time. That's my opinion. Anyway,
Right.
um,
I agree.
so
Yeah.
so it's a matter of getting our federal government to say this is not the way we should be doing this. And that's where a lot of the work, not just from Waterkeeper Alliance, but our partner waterkeepers across the country, um, and other organizations are trying to make that very point. There's got to be some reform in the way we do this.
And
Um,
Larry, for any of our listeners who are concerned about confined animal feeding operations in the Southeast and the illness and pollution they're causing, what kinds of things could our listeners do to help be part of the solution?
well, whether you live in North Carolina or not,
Yeah.
or if you live in the United States, let your own politicians know that you've got a concern about this. It doesn't mean that you have to go in and have fact after bullet point. Just, hey, I've got a concern with the way we're raising our meat in this country or in this state. What can you tell me about how you're changing things?
Yeah.
They can certainly in North Carolina reach out to their local riverkeeper, um, which would be in their specific
Yeah,
watershed.
we have a Chattahoochee River keeper here in Atlanta.
Oh man, yeah, they're awesome. They
Yeah.
are awesome. So,
Yeah.
and it's also just keeping their eyes and ears open
Yeah.
to what's happening as a result of the way we're raising these animals. We're now in a situation where we're dealing with this thing they call HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza. We call it bird flu, which is a result of raising animals in
Mm,
confinement. And there's not a whole lot of data available for that yet, but it is a huge concern. So you can talk to you can go to your local supermarket and say, hey, where does your meat come from? Or even your local restaurant.
yeah.
Where does your meat come from? Is it being raised by one of these CAFOs or is it being raised on the ground? The public pressure then starts to mount up with restaurant owners. A lot of restaurants didn't carry non-meat products for a long time
Yeah.
until people started to ask for them. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the real power is it's in the people, as we say, to stand up and say this is not good for our
Yeah.
environment, for our communities.
Yeah. And just me personally, I like to advocate in my scholarship and my activism that we as society shift our households and institutions to plant-based meals and away from products taken from animals, and to make these plant-based foods accessible and affordable. And that might involve asking the government to subsidize organic produce crops for humans
Right.
and not continued taxpayer subsidizing of destructive animal farms and animal feed crops.
Right.
And
Well, and
then,
and
yeah,
to even make it possible for these farmers who are growing meat the way we like to assume that they are on out in pasture to allow them to be more competitive in the marketplace. Because right now they can't compete with the prices that these Smithfield Foods or Samson.
industrial farms.
Yeah, they just can't. But it's also a matter of understanding that the meat you are buying, it ain't really all that healthy for you.
No.
There have been studies done that show the meat in the refrigerated case at your local supermarket have E. coli or fecal coliform right there that you're now taking into your home. There are so many facets of this thing that just don't make sense, whether it's on the surface or when you start getting in deeper. Um,
And
Probably one of the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, when we talk about how this industry has expanded, CAFO industry as a whole, since the 1950s, the number of farms in the U.S. has decreased
Mm,
by 80% since the at
80%,
since the at, since these factory farming processes first took place.
like kind of post World War II.
Right. But the argument that they try to make is, well, we're producing so much more. Well, I'm sorry, you're not. You're not producing that much more. It's a lot cheaper. It gets to the market quicker, but the health of the product, whether it's from bacteria, whether it's from antibiotic use, that's another whole story in itself
Yeah.
that we could get into. Um, so that it's just for people to understand that where they get their meat should be important to them, where it comes from, how it's produced. And I think they will start to see that there are some real challenges and real potential for harm, not
Yeah.
just environmentally, not with the communities, but even with whether you live in North Carolina or you're eating Smithfield food products in, you know, Iowa or California or wherever.
Yeah. And
It's a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I
I
was going
keep
to say,
cutting you off.
well, because of all these externalities, I'd also like to see a tax put on animal agribusiness products to help pay for the pollution cleanup, the healthcare costs, climate mitigation efforts, habitat restitution, because we need to try to offset animal farming problems that have been externalized onto society.
Right.
So, but that would also have the tax would mean that fewer people would want to buy, or you'd buy less. It would be a one way to kind of say it, along with not having like the subsidies go away. And so then if we had the real price of the food, it would be raised. And then let's make, organic plant-based foods more affordable for people. So that also kind of shifts things around. And that tax, like we have it on cigarettes, like it lets people know, hey, this is a problematic product.
Right.
And, it needs to help society deal with some of the problems.
Right. And
So,
and
but
one
I
of
know that's kind of controversial to mention a tax, but there's a,
well, it
there's,
is, and that's not really within our bailiwick, so to speak.
right.
But
So I'm just mentioning that from my
oh,
own,
sure.
that's how I feel
Well,
about it. And to me, it's warranted. It's
yeah,
warranted.
one
Yeah.
one of my personal anecdotes, because a lot of times, speaking in public, people say, "Well, then what do you want us to do?"
Yeah.
And I can't force you to become a vegetarian or a vegan. Okay, some people they're definitely not going to give up their bacon, which
Mhm.
is ridiculous to me. But eat less.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was like when you were growing up, because I have a feeling I'm a good bit older than you are. We didn't have meat at every meal just because it wasn't something that was part of a standard diet. So just cut back. And if
Yeah.
you say,
It's
well,
too
I can't
much from
afford,
a health perspective. It's really causing all kinds of diseases, right? We're
true,
eating, it seems normal to have animal products at every meal now, but it wasn't for our ancestors, and so our bodies are not built for for all this animal products, because also we're primates, and so like
right,
we like a lot of plant foods.
right. So it's, there is a lot that we can do as the general public. And
Yeah.
particularly when we're talking about something, meat, that is a big part of our everyday lives. People eat meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we're going to have to be the ones, whether we live in Eastern North Carolina or North Carolina or not, to say this isn't right,
Yeah.
and bring it down to a very personal level. But by bringing it down to a personal level, then you're also including these community members,
Yeah.
uh, these environmental justice communities
And all
to,
the wildlife who are
as
affected. And
right.
like we have in Georgia, we're one of the number one producers of chicken meat.
Yes, you
And
are.
so we, like we're part of the problem as well. Here in Atlanta, you don't see it as much, but if you go up towards Gainesville and then you get into North Georgia, you see it more and you smell it more. So like but really probably every state in the nation's got some it's gonna have confined animal feeding operations of some kind. And now it's a global issue in China and all these places. They're building, yeah, like pig hotels basically to grow. So I mean, we've exported this very kind of efficient from a monetary perspective, but disgusting and unsustainable way of growing animals, mass producing animals has been kind of shipped around the world. So then, as we've talked about on the show, it relates to the climate issue as well. And so, I mean, but Larry, we have to end the show, but there's like no way to
Oh my
end
God.
this. We
I thought we
can't.
had like Thought we had like 24 more hours we were going to
Yeah,
go
right.
here.
Because I,
Yeah,
every time,
there's
everything
just a
we mention like ripples into something else. And I know you
right.
have so many stories. So we'll have to have you back on the show at
Oh,
another time.
I would love that.
Tell
I
us
would
some
love that,
more
Carrie.
of the stories. But that's the end of our show. But I want to thank you, Larry Baldwin, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for the work that you and the Waterkeeper Alliance do protecting wildlife and public health, trying to mitigate the water pollution caused by factory animal farming.
And Carrie, thank you for having me. And on behalf of Waterkeeper Alliance and waterkeepers around the country, this is the way that we get the word out. So it's greatly appreciated that you're tackling this very huge issue. So we thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/In Tune to Nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other animals like those harmed by animal farming. Thank you for listening. Cheers.